sentence is written in italics, and that's because the examiner is trying to set the scene, as it were, of that which you're about to read. Now, that's not a paragraph. The paragraphs start for when it is the normal typeface. So make sure that you count carefully. In fact, I would number the paragraphs 1, 2, 3, 4, so you know exactly which paragraph you're answering this question on. Because if you choose the wrong paragraph, zip marks. Okay, right. So remember that rather disgustingly, to answer this question, you're going to pee on a table. So you need a table with 3 columns and 6 rows. Point, evidence, and explain. So you know that you're going to always present this answer in a table. I know it's a bit odd in an English exam to draw a table on the paper, but you are going to. It's perfectly acceptable. It's going to be quite a big table, so give yourself plenty of room. Well, I'll do one for you. The point I'm going to make on the passage you've read is this. The writer creates the image that Dean Potter is like an animal. And the evidence, the quote I chose to prove my point is this. With his wide-set brown eyes and prominent and slightly battered-looking nose, tumbling mane and barrelled chest. Well, then I go on to explain the quote. The writer describes Dean Potter in a way which suggests he is like a lion, a tumbling mane. This creates the image that Dean is the king of rock climbing, much like a lion is the king of the jungle. Additionally, Dean, again, like a lion, is brave, physically strong, and someone to be feared as well as admired. Well, I've now done my first point of the first paragraph. Each paragraph needs 3 quotes. That's why you've got a table with 6 rows. 3 rows for the first paragraph and 3 rows for the second paragraph. So let's stick with paragraph 2 and look at our second point. The description of Dean Potter suggests that he is rather complex, an action man certainly, but also slightly mysterious. A brooding inhabitant of the wild who is occasionally roused to fantastic bouts of action and daring stunts. The writer deliberately selects emotive language, that's just language that creates an emotion, to describe Dean's actions such as fantastic and daring. It is as though he was he has hero-like qualities. This is contrasted by the word brooding, which might suggest that he is at the same time slightly sullen and introspective. Okay, something for you to do. Over to you again. I have done the first 2 points of paragraph 2. Now you need to finish paragraph 2 with its final point and then go on to do 3 quotes of the second paragraph. You should take about 25 minutes to do this. Okay, so we've done the first 2 questions. Let's move on to the third one, which is the easiest one of all. Remember that I asked you to write that big 15? Well, that's because this question is asking you to summarise. And you can achieve lots of marks through this magic number 15. Okay, I'm going to explain what you do with this 15 now. You're going to use it to write 15 bullet points, which summarise the information that you read in passage A and passage B. The question is a real gift. You will get marks by writing a really good quality bullet point list. Okay, so let's look what the examiner is asking to do in this summary question. For the first time, you're going to look at passage B. So this is the time to read it, but not yet. The first thing you must do with question 3 is to read carefully what the examiner is asking you to do. And in this case, for passage B, they are asking you to summarise the ways in which paintballing is a safe sport. And then you're going to go back to our old favourite passage A, which you have read lots of times already. And this time it's asking you why climbing the nose of El Capitan and the way that Dame Potter makes this climb is dangerous. The examiner asks you to use your own words, of course, and to write about one side in total. Okay, 15 marks are available for the content of your answer. So you remember that big number 15? Well, we're going to get those 15 marks by writing 15 bullet points. Okay, so a top tip for this question. Once you get to question 3, I want you to look carefully at the question and what exactly the examiner's asking you to summarise. So in this case, when you open the paper on the top of passage B, before you even read it, I want you to write down on the top of it, in your handwriting, the ways in which paintballing is a safe sport. Then turn to passage A and write on the top of that why climbing the nose of El Capitan and the way Dean Potter climbs is dangerous on the top of passage A. So you're now going to use the highlighters. And you're going to do something called active reading. You're going to take the highlighter and every time you read how the writer's explained paintballing is safe, you're going to highlight that point. And when you reread passage A, you're going to do exactly the same about why climbing is dangerous. And that's how you're going to get these 15 marks. You need to make a list of 7 to 8 points for passage B and 7 to 8 points for passage A. But, and this is the big but, you're going to highlight lots of the passage. You're going to have many more ideas than just those 7 or 8. What you must never do is repeat the same point twice. Okay, you're going to have a go at this now. I want you to do that work on passage B. Open the paper and write at the top of it the ways in which paintballing is a safe sport, and then with the highlighter read the passage carefully, highlighting every time the writer talks about it being safe. You should take about 10 minutes to do this task. Okay. Your passage B will now be full of highlighted ideas. You're going to use those highlights to write a list on the exam paper of 7 or 8 ideas about why paintballing is safe. See whether you got the same ideas as I did. Okay, I think the examiner will be looking for something like this. I think paintballing is safe from this article because a medical form must be completed to prove the satisfactory health of the players, that protective clothing must be worn, that an eye mask protects damage from the eyes, the paintballs being made of gel and therefore are harmless, paintballs cannot be fired at speeds above the legal limit, an instructor gives guidance on the strict rules and arrange a practice session, and since the equipment is checked, accidents are very rare and in fact other sports are more dangerous than paintballing. See, none of my points are the same. They're all different and they're written in sentences, but actually they're just bullet points and I've numbered them so I know that I've hit at least 7, but preferably 8. Paintballing is considered to be safe for families. So, something else for you to do? I want you to do exactly the same with passage A. You'll be quicker doing passage A because the first 2 questions were on this passage as well. But this time you're doing the active reading and you're looking and highlighting the points where you're looking at why it is dangerous to climb. Off you go. Did you get these ideas? El Capitan is a famous rock for being difficult to climb. Its main feature is that it has 2,000-foot vertical wall with an overhanging shelf. The climber was under-equipped for his climb. Adding to the danger was the reckless speed. The dangerous start was really rushed. The first climber did not wait until his partner had reached the first metal peg. Being joined by a rope meant that a fall by one of the pair could pull the other partner down too. Okay, on your exam paper, you have now got 2 bullet point lists with the 2 subtitles, Passage B and Passage A, and it will look something like this. Now, the final part of this question is that you're going to now take these 2 bullet point lists and change them into 2 short paragraphs. That's really easy because the content of the paragraphs have already been written in your bullet points. So Passage B might change those bullet points to look something like this. Paintballing is safe enough for families and non-experienced people to participate in these pretend battles. A medical form must be completed to prove the satisfactory health of the players, who are then issued with protective clothing which includes an eye mask. The paintballs, being made of gel, are harmless and they cannot be fired at speeds above the legal limit. An instructor gives guidance on the strict rules and arranges a practice session. Since the equipment is checked and accidents are very rare, and in fact other sports are more dangerous than paintballing. All I've done is I've taken those bullet points and I've rewritten them into sensible sentences in the shortest way I possibly can. I must not use the exact words that are written in the passage. I need to retell the information in the passage in my own words. Shall we look at that El Capitan one? Well, this is how I might draft that paragraph. El Capitan is a notoriously difficult and much feared rock for climbers in the USA because of the 2,000-foot vertical wall followed by an overhanging shelf and its narrow handholds. Potter was under-equipped for his climb in various ways, including the fact that his harness was homemade and insubstantial. Added dangers were the necessity for reckless speed, which involved a rush start rather than waiting until his partner had reached the first metal peg. Being joined by a rope meant that a fall by one of the pair could pull the other partner down too. So, physically, this is what your piece of writing for this question is going to look like. 1 bullet point list for Passage B, a 2nd bullet point list for Passage A, and then 2 summary paragraphs that sum it up. That's how you can achieve the whole marks for this question. And believe you me, you really can achieve all the marks for this question. Okay, well, I hope you're beginning to feel confident about the technique you need to use to be able to answer the 3 questions, and we'll practice that again in the next session. Well, welcome to revision session 2. We've still got the same aims for this session. We're going to remind ourselves about what the paper looks like, how to deal with each of the questions, and to be really confident about how to do the exam. This session, we're going to really concentrate on the technique of each of the questions. Okay, so you will need the past paper for session 2, a pen, lined paper, and those all-important highlighters. Let's look at the exam paper. Let's imagine it's the exam, and I want you to rehearse that routine that we've practiced already, but we're going to practice every time, so you absolutely do it every time you do a past paper and the exam for real. So you open the paper, you go straight to question 2, and you're going to draw a mini table, 3 columns and 6 rows. Then you're going to go to question 3 and you're going to draw a big number 15. Then you're going to read question 1 and then read passage A. Don't read passage B till you get to question 3. Okay, so over to you. On this paper, I would like you to do those instructions. Well, for this session, I want to concentrate on the nuance that this is an international exam. And that means the examiners need to take pieces of reading and passages from all over the world. So it is probably more unlikely for you to have a piece of writing based in Britain or Europe than it is in the rest of the world. So you will definitely come across words and places and environments that are utterly unfamiliar to you, but it doesn't really matter. In this past paper, we're going to have a look at a home that has an issue with a mouse. Actually, the truth is that it's a problem with mice. I want you to do something now. I would like you to read passage A, but this time with a pencil. I'd like you to circle any words that are unfamiliar to you. And then we're going to look at a technique of how to deal with words that you don't understand. So I've taken a paragraph from passage A to look at dealing with words that you might be unfamiliar with. You may have circled, for example, the word Mouseham. The Duval family were relatively new to the village of Mouseham. Well, if you're like me, you've never heard of the village Mouseham, but I know that it's the name of the village because it has a capital letter. And I know that there'll be certainly names and places that I've never heard of before, but I can be at ease because I know if there's a capital letter, it doesn't matter that I don't know the word, I just know it's the name of something. And here's another one you might have circled. They had feared a long period of suspicion that even the gimlet-eyed old woman, who normally took months to unbend and acknowledge newcomers, warmed to the blonde-haired children and their gentle parents. Well, I have to tell you, I think I'm a pretty good reader, but I had never heard of the expression gimlet-eyed. But what I can do is that I can use the technique of trying to have a best guess. You see, it doesn't really matter that there'll be words that you definitely don't know, as long as you've got a general idea of what they might mean. The best technique is to look at what surrounds the word that is unfamiliar to you. So let's look at this one. They had feared a long suspicion that even the gimlet-eyed old woman who normally took months to unbend, well, obviously it's a lady who's not very nice. So gimlet eyes probably means that her eyes are quite piercing, quite unpleasant, quite direct. And in fact, that's what it means, because a gimlet is a tool that means for boring into wood. So, you will definitely come across words that you have never heard before, but the important thing is that you don't panic. The most important thing is that you've got an overall sense of the passage, and in this case, that the home is overrun by mice. Okay, let's look at the directed writing question for this paper. Remember, the examiner in this question is checking not only that you can read, but that you have understood the passage. The directed question is asking you again to use the information you've read, in this case, to write a newspaper article. Okay, let's look at the question. We're going to read it slowly and carefully to check we totally understand what the examiner wants us to do. Remember, the examiner will always tell you who you are pretending to be. And in this case, you are to imagine you are a reporter investigating the cause of the infestation of mice that has occurred with the village of Mouseham. You are to write a report for the national newspaper using the headline, "Horror Plague Overwhelms Village." You should include the following: the effects of the infestation on the villagers, the attitudes of the villagers to the Duval family, and the comments of the Duval parents and children. Just like every directed question, you base the content of the newspaper article on the passage that you've read. And the length is really important. I really can't emphasise it enough. Half a page, only one page is really not enough. 2 pages is ideal. So before we start, let's just remind each other about how you write a newspaper article. So let's look at the features of writing an article. The first thing is that you always create a headline, and that headline needs to be really quite catchy. It needs to make the reader want to read the whole article. Following the headline, there's often another sentence that is a sub-headline that explains a little bit more about the story. Paragraphs in an article are often short, and so the article is quite speedy. And then they will always have quotes for people who were there. And very often they seem to put their ages. So this might be an example. Mrs. Green, in brackets 47, and local residents reported, "I just couldn't believe what I was seeing." Every time you use a quote in a newspaper, you must use quote marks. Okay, so you've got to write a newspaper article, and you need to imagine that you're a reporter investigating this infestation. And the examiner even tells you what title you're going to use in the article. So, because you have been given a title, you must use it. You must follow exactly what the examiner is telling you to do. So, there's your headline: Horror Plague Overwhelms Village. You could then write a sub-headline that explains a little bit more. So I've chosen to write: People of Maslam in despair over mouse invasion. Now, you know you have to follow the examiner's instructions. Well, the examiner then gave you 3 bullet points. It means that you must follow those bullet points in your newspaper article. It's really helpful that the examiner gives you those bullet points because it allows you to structure your piece of writing. Not a lot of imagination needed, and not a lot of time worrying about planning the piece of writing because the examiner's given you the plan. Okay, so your article begins to look like this. There's your headline, your sub-headline, and then the 3 bullet points that the examiner's asked you to do. And you can see that the article begins to write itself. So let's just remind ourselves about this directed writing question. Use what you have read in your writing. So don't make things up. Repeat what you have read. Follow exactly the instructions the examiner has given you. So if the examiner says what the headline's got to be, use that headline. If the examiner gives you 3 bullet points to follow, follow those bullet points. Start at the beginning of the passage and work your way down. Write at least 1 to 2 sides, preferably 2 sides of writing. Okay, over to you again. Now it's your turn. I want you to write the article. Write at least 1 to 2 pages and take about 40 minutes to do this. So we've looked at the directed writing question on this paper. Time to look at the writer's effects. So again, this question is asking you to think about why the writer of the piece has chosen particular words or phrases to affect you as the reader. Okay, again, the examiner asks you just to look at 2 paragraphs. So pick the paragraphs they have given you to read. So, in question 2, the examiner is asking you to look at paragraph 5, and in paragraph 5 you're looking at the way the mice are described in the parents' bedroom, but in the last paragraph you're looking at the way a mother mouse is described with looking after her babies. Right, rather disgustingly, as always for this question, you are going to pee on a table. You're going to definitely pee on a table because it means that you will secure the most marks for this question. 3 columns and 6 rows. Leave yourself lots of room to do lots of writing in this. Let's have a look at what one table might look like. So if I'm looking at the paragraph that describes the mice, I might make this point. The writer describes the movement of all the mice together. There are so many of them, the groups swell like the movement of a huge wave on the floor. Then I pick my quote to prove that what I'm saying is correct. Both he and his wife cried out as a swell of writhing, glistening grey rodents with long, dirty, gristly tails took less than a minute to retreat under the floorboards. Remember, I don't want to spend a lot of time copying out a very long quote, so I've used ellipses at the beginning and at the end of the quote to just shorten it. And then I need to go on and explain why I've made that point and used that piece of evidence. The writer used a list of adjectives to describe the mice. He emphasises the less attractive attributes of the mice: long, dirty, gristly tails. This, along with the description of the type of movement, such as writhing, suggests the mice are sort of one revolting, monstrous being. On the other hand, when we look at the last paragraph and we're asked to look about the mother mouse and her brood, the writer creates a completely different effect. And this is a point I might make about that.